everybody, I'm back with my smallest build in a long time, which is the little hovering pod from the Mandalorian. Earlier this year I did a Razor Crest build. When I saw that they came out with a Black Series version in the 6-inch scale of the child of the little baby Yoda, I knew I wanted to make the little pod for him to fly around in. Now, when they released this figure, they didn't release a pod to go with it, but they did just put out this new, a little bit smaller than 3 3/4 inch scale series called Mission Fleet, and in that they have a set that has the Mandalorian and the child figure. And if you compare the two, they're just about the same size. So this works out being a pretty good scale to work with the Black Series figure. So I wanted to use this as the base of a build to make a little flying pod for him. So I went into my bin of random quad parts and I found an old, I think it's Fast Lane, one of those little cheap $30 quads you'll find at Target or Walmart. And it ends up being, the motors are just about the right size to lift all this mass here. And I put together a boilerplate out of I think it's a little foam craft egg that I just kind of sawed the corner out of to make it look like the pod. And I used this to work out the motor spacing and to figure out prop selection to be able to lift the mass of the figure. He's pretty tiny, but he still weighs 5-10 grams. So on a quad this small, every gram counts. So I wanted to also shrink the spacing of the motors because I didn't want arms sticking out over the edge of the pod. And so I worked out all the motor spacing, worked out where the flight controller would go, worked out where to put the battery, and flew this little guy around my living room, and the sight of the baby Yoda kind of floating around was definitely put a smile on my face. So from there I pulled a couple plastic shells off of this as the form, and I think it's 0.01 or 0.015 polycarbonate. Joined those two together and then worked on the ship in a bottle exercise of fitting all the parts inside. So I'll pull the little blanket out. You can see the flight controllers in there, and the batteries in the back there. I painted it black so it would blend in a little bit better. And there's a little access port on the back where I can get to the connector to charge it and plug it back in. So one of the hardest parts in all of this was getting the prop spacing to work correctly. I'll see if I can line them all up here. But you can see there's maybe a millimeter's worth of clearance. They all overlap pretty substantially, but this was so that I could get the motors to stay well within the profile of the pod, and so when it's flying around from above, they blend in nicely, and the black props, when they spin, they become almost invisible. So this was a fun little build. One of the interesting things with these cheap quads is that there's no like programming interface, so I can't go in and tweak the settings or change the gains on it. You have to do all of that through tweaking the spacing of the motors, tweaking the angles of the motors. I added a little bit of cant to the motors so that it has a little bit better yaw control, and messing around with different props. So you're effectively changing the gains by changing the distance from the center of gravity and the amount of thrust that each one of the motors can produce. So, this is one of those projects that it looked pretty simple on the surface, and the details of getting it right were at times frustrating, but ultimately rewarding. It's pretty cool to be able to fly it around the bigger action figure. It's pretty challenging to keep it. I was trying to take some nice photos of this, and to keep it hovering within the 6-inch height of the Mandalorian figure is quite the challenge, but the visual is pretty cool. So as with all my builds, if you have any questions about how I put it together, or any of the parts I used, just leave those questions down in the comments below. I usually try to answer everything as best I can. And if you have any suggestions on what you want to see built next, just let me know. I've got a few more builds in the queue, and hopefully I'll have some videos up pretty soon for those. But until then, thanks for watching, and see you around.